Welcome to The Net Result, the podcast where we uncover stories of growth, innovation, and purpose. I'm your host, Ben Smith. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jerry Toth, a rainforest conservationist, chocolate entrepreneur, and filmmaker. Jerry is the co-founder of TMA, a nonprofit restoring Ecuador's Pacific forest, and Toth Chocolate, a pioneering company that has turned rare heirloom cacao into one of the most exclusive chocolates in the world. Before we begin, just a quick introduction to WSI. For more than 25 years, WSI has helped organizations around the globe harness digital marketing to generate leads, grow their business, and stay ahead of the curve. So let's jump into it. Jerry, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. I know your story takes us from Wall Street to the Ecuadorian rainforest and from protecting endangered ecosystems to creating luxury brands. So you've got all kinds of stories to tell, but I'm looking forward to digging into how those experiences all connect. Yeah, let's just kind of get into some questions here. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your origin story. I know that you studied economics at Cornell and the London School of Economics and even started out in finance. So how did you suddenly end up in Ecuador in 2006? And what inspired you to kind of go in that direction?
So it is a bit of a unconventional path. My very first job after I graduated was working in investment banking in New York, and it was just a job that wasn't suited to me. It was almost like a job that I wanted to get out of before it even started, and I knew that. I think at that point in my life, I had been doing everything that I thought I was supposed to do, trying to, win the race and do everything that was kind of laid out in front of me. And then I guess around that very first year, I think I was just 22 at the time, just had a realization that wasn't actually in my path. I wanted to do something else. And I felt called to go down to the tropics.
Okay.
I felt called to live outside of major cities, and I felt called to explore a bit. And so at the age of 23, I moved to South America, and there was a few years there where I was wandering. I was working odd jobs. I was working as a journalist for a while, and eventually I met up with an Ecuadorian woman and another American. And the three of us, we had been talking about creating change in the world, and we came to the realization that we actually wanted to be doing the change rather than just kind of pontificating. And so we decided to put our money where our mouth is and jump into a project. And our goal at the time was now it sounds very simplistic almost. We just wanted to protect an area, a beautiful part of South America that looked like it was in the crosshairs of unsustainable development. We wanted to see if we could kind of change the course onto a more sustainable path. And, there was we did do quite a bit of research as to where that would be. We were living in Ecuador at the time, so we narrowed it down at least to Ecuador. One of our members, Isabel, was from there, so that kind of made that decision a bit more straightforward. And then from there, we explored the country, looked for areas that were in imminent destruction. We were looking specifically to protect forests. And, from there, a whole other side of our work took flight. We started building a forest preserve. We started practicing organic and regenerative agriculture. We started working with farmers that lived near our properties to reforest their own land. And it kind of then the next step was creating a chocolate company to have a market for those farmers that were reforesting their own land. And now kind of get to where we are now, where we're doing all those things, but just at a much, much larger scale. When we first started out, it was on a scale of hundreds of acres, and now we're on a scale of tens of thousands of acres.
Wow. That's really cool that it's grown so much. What part of Ecuador are you in? And I know you're on a reserve, but I don't want to try and pronounce the name of the reserve. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about where you are and kind of like what sort of rainforest are you protecting?
Yeah, so it's the coastal area of Ecuador. It's the Pacific forest of Ecuador is kind of the name of the ecosystem. It's the part of Ecuador is pound for pound. Apparently, it's the most biodiverse nation on earth in terms of per unit of land. And even within Ecuador, there's many different ecoregions, all of which are quite, impressive and beautiful. But the coast of Ecuador is by far the most deforested and has had the kind of the roughest go in that sense, just because it's been the breadbasket for the past century. And so, when you think of Ecuador, the best way to think of Ecuador is you can kind of think of it as three parts. You have right down the middle of it, you have the Andes Mountains, which run kind of north-south like a spine.
Hmm.
East of that, you have the Amazon basin, so that kind of feeds into the Amazon. And then on the west side, you have this other ecosystem that ultimately drops down from the Andes to the Pacific Ocean. And we focus on the Pacific side. That side has lost about 95% of its original forest, so it's down to its last 5%. And that's where we set up camp. Literally, we literally just set up tents at the top of this mountain. At the time, it didn't even have a name. We raised $16,000 to purchase 100 acres at the top of that mountain.
Okay.
We legally constituted a foundation in Ecuador and the U.S., but for many years it was extremely grassroots. Just a couple of people trying to learn how to be conservationists, trying to learn how to be farmers, and make as many friends as possible with our neighbors. So that's kind of the beginnings of it.
Okay, cool. So you formed an organization, TMA, and it sounds like you've actually bought land, and you're talking about thousands of acres. So how are you protecting the land and the rainforest? Obviously, part of that is by owning it, but what other steps have you taken to kind of to further, protect the land and protect the farmland and kind of form the company?
Yeah, so the area where we are there's a coastal mountain range, and in the foothills and lower parts of that mountain range are many agricultural communities. On the mountain itself, it's wild land that's for the most part owned by absentee landowners who's inherited it from their fathers or grandfathers
Okay.
generations ago, people that owned literally many thousands of acres. It was just passed down, and people that weren't living there, they just happened to inherit this massive chunk of property that they had never been to. So that we basically, our decision was, okay, this land is not being managed by the owner. Let's purchase it from the owner and basically create a public good, which is a forest preserve.
Okay.
And I say public good because that forest at the top of the mountain is the source of all the water that everybody downstream uses for agriculture, for survival. And so the first step was purchasing the land, but then your question's a very good one. What do you do beyond that? There's a lot of, even within Ecuador, there's numerous quote unquote protected areas, which we call paper parks. They're protected on paper only. No one's actually doing there's no boots on the ground. No one's actually doing the management work.
Mm-hmm.
So the management work is much more complex. A lot more goes into that. And that it took us a few years to really figure out how to go about doing that. And there's a few different approaches. There's one approach is the so-called fortress conservation approach, which is you kind of cordon off this forest and you don't let anyone do anything to it. That's problematic for a few reasons. It breeds resentment. It becomes much harder to manage conflict. Our approach was just to make friends with everybody that surrounds that forest, everyone who's in any way connected to it, and try to find ways for people to make more money by either protecting the forest or restoring it rather than cutting it down. That is the entire name of the game. How do we make this forest economically beneficial for the people that live in and around it? And
Okay.
so everything that we do is hit it on that. And that's what brings us to cacao farming, because cacao farming and agroforestry more broadly is a way for people to make money through forests by cultivating forests or managing forests rather than cutting forests down.
I see. Okay. So that's obviously one lesson learned, like go the friendly route rather than the strong hand route. Any other lessons that you've learned along the way? I mean, you've been doing this for almost 20 years now. So tell us more about some of the lessons you've come across.
Yeah, it's a lot of things that I think that apply to to any business, to entrepreneurs in general, to engineers. It's everyone. It's you try a bunch of things, you see what works, what doesn't work, and then you iterate on that. And so that was our approach. We tried many different ways to kind of engage people, many different ways to add value. Some didn't work. So we said, okay, that's not the path. Some did work. And we said, okay, those are worth looking at. How can we optimize that? And then you just keep building on it. And it took us, I'd say it probably took us 15 years to really understand what it is that we need to be doing to be the most successful. That's really helped us kind of do better at our jobs, make more friends in the area, bring more people on board, and ultimately have kind of more success.
Okay, great. So we've been talking a lot about, conservation and chocolate. So let's, I guess, get into the business side of things and moving from kind of protecting the land to building a purpose for it. And that's the Toak Chocolate Company. So how did you go from kind of discovering these rare cacao trees to building, I guess, a bit of a luxury brand out of it? That's an interesting story as well. So, guide us through that formation.
Yeah, my relationship with obviously with my relationship with chocolate dates back to when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old as a kid and
Right.
eating candy at Halloween and Christmas and whatnot. But I had never seen a cacao tree, the tree that produces the raw material for chocolate, until I arrived to South America. So until, when I was maybe 24, 25 years old.
Hmm.
And even the very first day that we stepped foot in the forest that is now the forest preserve we protect, the Hamaquaque Reserve, I had never seen cacao on a tree. And we were walking up into the forest with the previous owner, and he was trying to show us the land, seeing if we were interested in buying this kind of 100 acres at the very top of a mountain, miles away from civilization. And we saw these trees with these yellow, beautiful yellow pods hanging from them. And I remember asking him, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, that's cacao." And I, pretended like I knew what that was, but I just wasn't even sure. It's like, "Oh yeah, right. Okay. That's what makes chocolate." How? I didn't know that. And I grew up outside Chicago, and has I don't know if it still does, but it used to have a Hershey's chocolate factory that you could smell when you drive into the neighborhood. So my
Mhm.
association with chocolate was something that it was produced in a factory. The fact that you could grow it on trees was kind of mind blowing. And so those trees are just in the forest from generations ago from previous landholders. And so we started harvesting the cacao we asked some of our neighbors, some of the people we're working with, how do you process it into chocolate? And they showed us the basics. You pull the seeds from the fruit pod and you ferment and dry them, and then you roast them and you grind them and you mix them with sugar and or milk. And there you have it. In a nutshell, that's how you make chocolate. We started doing this in a very artisanal, very rustic way. Our house in the forest still is to this day off the grid. And at the time, there was no electricity whatsoever. Now we have solar panels and we have satellite internet and whatnot. But at the time, it was just a house in the middle of the woods. And so we did everything by hand. We roasted everything over an open fire. We used a manual hand grinder to grind the beans. And it was fun. It was interesting. The people that came and visited it were fascinated by it. But the other side of it is that tree just simply really grows well in that area. And the other element of the cacao tree that's important is that it's naturally adapted to grow in the shade of other trees. It is a specialist thriving in the understory of a rainforest. And that wasn't kind of new knowledge. That's Cacao has been a favorite tool of rainforest conservationists for a while. We just found new ways to put that to use. And so surrounding the forest preserve in most directions was land that was already deforested. It had already been converted mostly to cattle pasture long ago. At that point, it was quite degraded. And so we pitched farmers on the idea of converting their degraded land back into forest using cacao as kind of the revenue side of that. And so
Hmm.
interplanting cacao with a lot of other fruit trees, with native timber trees, with banana, and the idea being, okay, you have this extremely low productivity patch of cattle pasture that's producing minimal food and minimal revenue per hectare, and replacing with something that is much better for the farmer in terms of revenue, much better for the community in terms of food security, much better for the atmosphere in terms of carbon removal, much better for biodiversity. And that was the basic idea. And we started that in a simple, uh, general way many years ago. And in the process of that, and later we found ways to optimize it, and that's what we're focusing on now. It's become, now a program with about 100 different regenerative farms in this group of farmers we're growing with. But at the time, it was just this cool idea we saw it as a tool with potential. And I just really got into farming personally in the process. I kind of got obsessed with the fact that you can grow food on trees, and especially you can grow something as special as chocolate. To me, it was like the analog to being a winemaker. But if you live in the tropics, you don't make wine, you make chocolate.
Got it.
And I saw an opportunity to elevate that to a level much higher than it was at the time. This was, we're talking 2013, 2012, 2013. And kind of the artisanal food boom it had begun. The term foodie, I think, was already in use at that point, but it was still young. People knew at that point that wine was something worthy um, of taking seriously, of tasting consciously and whatnot. But chocolate was still regarded as candy. And when I would go back to the U.S. and see the way people consume chocolate, and it seemed to me almost disrespectful to something that at that point was more important to me. I knew its origins. I knew all the work that goes into it, all the kind of the care that must be given to the land, the care that must be given to the seeds once during the whole process. And so I created a company with two other people. This is outside of TMA, the conservation organization that we've been talking about is a nonprofit organization. I created a for-profit company with a few other people, an Austrian guy named Carl Schweisser, his wife, Denise Valencia, who's from Ecuador. And the three of us had this idea to let's literally, I think at the beginning of the process, the idea was to create the Rolls Royce of chocolate. That was an actual phrase that we used with the sleek packaging of an iPod. I think we were talking in those terms. And I had the good fortune to partner with two amazing people who really helped move that vision forward. And, it's what started out as the idea to create, a special bar of chocolate became this mission to create the most extravagant expression of chocolate the world had ever seen.
Hmm.
And by the end of 2014, we brought to market a bar of chocolate priced at $260
Wow.
for a single bar. And that kind of, surprised a lot of people, generated a lot of publicity, and kind of started a new debate in the industry. And from there, we've been evolving ever since. So that's the origin story of Toak.
Awesome. So I've never heard of Tilak before. That sounds super luxury in terms of like the price point. How did you carve out that brand? I mean, obviously chocolate is a pretty crowded global market. Like what strategies have you used to help you kind of carve out that luxury space? And maybe what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs who are kind of trying to do the same thing, even if it's not chocolate, maybe it's just their own luxury brand?
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that it was a crowded field was one of the factors, because that point, I mean, since we've entered the field has gotten much more crowded, but even then it was already a crowded field. And so, how do we create something that stands out? That was one of the first questions. There were then, and certainly now, many companies that responsibly source their chocolate. There are many companies that produce organic chocolate. There are many companies that produce pretty packaging on their chocolate bars. There are many people that produce great tasting chocolate. So how do we stand in kind of a class of our own?
Hmm.
And that drove our decision to kind of take this to the highest level. And so we did a few things. For one, part of it was the sourcing. So we found a grove of trees, a valley really, that had these trees with this ancient variety of cacao that up until around that time was believed to be extinct. It's called Nacional cacao.
Okay.
It traces its lineage thousands and thousands of years back to the kind of prehistoric, kind of the way before Columbus arrived to the New World, thousands of years ago in Ecuador. Cacao goes back at least 5,300 years in Ecuador. Ecuador is the true origin of cacao, which not everyone is aware of. And so those early varieties of cacao started in the Amazon of Ecuador, somehow migrated through trade to the coastal side of Ecuador, something like at least 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. And at some point, there were a few varieties. There's one variety that became the most well-regarded. It was called Nacional. It's the variety that became dominant in coastal Ecuador. And by the 1800s, once Europeans were importing cacao and it was kind of becoming a thing in other parts of the world, this variety of cacao was considered the best of the best. There were two plant diseases in the early 1900s that nearly wiped it out. And after that, it kind of slowly started to fade and other seeds were brought in. Cacaos started to hybridize in Ecuador. And by the time we arrived, Nacional Cacao, you had basically, it only existed in kind of as a part of hybrids. And so it was kind of, imagine what was once a thoroughbred dog. Now, all you could find was just a bunch of mutts.
Hmm.
And we found one valley that had that thoroughbred dog. It had all the characteristics. We believed it was the kind of the pure Nacional. We sent off leaf samples to be genetically tested, and it was proven to be 100% pure Nacional. So that was kind of something special that was very rare in the world. So that was the source of the cacao. And then along with that, we created packaging, credit to my partner, Carl Schweitzer, on this, just absolutely beautiful packaging. The original edition was a handcrafted wooden box. Each box had an individual bar number engraved on the back. Wood tasting utensils that would come in the box, 116-page booklet. And so it was just kind of everything we did was taking a page at that point from the wine and whiskey world, how we talked about it in terms of how we talked about tasting, what the label looked like, the terms we used. We used terms like terroir and appellation, all these things these terms that are common in the wine industry, and really did everything we could to position it as this really special luxury good. And that generated publicity. And there were a lot of articles. We had articles in Forbes, Fortune Magazine, Robb Report, New York Times, LA Times, CNN did a story, BBC did a story, National Geographic. And so that generated enough of a buzz. And from then we just kind of started iterating. We started creating editions that were priced more accessibly, so that more people could afford it, not just kind of the richest of the rich. And now we have chocolate at several tiers. We have the $260 chocolate. We have editions that are still actually more expensive than that. We have aged editions. We've aged in casks of cognac, old cognac casks or whiskey casks. We have editions that are $30, $40. We have cacao powder that's $20. We have other chocolate bars that are $12. And so I think our most accessible edition, I think, has gotten down to $8. So hitting more demographics and a wider base of people, but still it's the same kind of approach.
Great. So it sounds like you got kind of a broad range of products now. What would you say are some of your biggest marketing challenges? I assume it's not easy to run a company with, solar panels and satellite internet in Ecuador, but maybe you've got some solutions you've come up with. Like, how do you market it? How do you get to the target demographic?
Yeah, well, fortunately, the TOAC is not run out of the rainforest. That would be hard. We have a proper office in Quito, which is the capital city of Ecuador. Yeah, I think when we first started, we were I would say either it was if it was a mistake or just a sign of people that had never started a business before we started this, but we put so much emphasis on the sourcing and on the branding and the storytelling. And then we had this amazing product and the manufacturing, and we had this amazing product and it was generating publicity, but we didn't actually have distribution channels set up. We didn't really know how to do sales at that point. We weren't sophisticated about marketing. We weren't using digital marketing at the beginning. And so we had a lot of growing pains at the beginning just for those factors. We overlooked some of those things you have to have. You have to have distribution. You have to have sales. You have to have marketing. So that took us some time to get up to speed there. And also, we had this issue at the beginning where we just had this one really expensive product and not everybody could afford it. And so just slowly but surely, we worked on improving each of those elements, and we brought in new team members. We raised capital so that we could expand our team. We were able to invest in machinery, and eventually we kind of created the modern version of TOAC that we have today.
Okay, great. And I think based on some of the research I did about you, you're also kind of a filmmaker and storyteller. Is that true?
Yes, I've made kind of everything I do is either directly involved or on the periphery of of forests. And so
Okay.
I had made a few films. They've kind of ecologically themed films of different, primarily art films. I would call them hobbies more than anything serious. But I would created a few. I made a few films, presented them at film festivals,
Nice.
and just trying to find different ways to communicate ecological themes. Sometimes the straightforward web, TMA website with its facts
Hmm.
is one way to do it. Images is another, stories is another, chocolate is another. So
Yeah,
those are different languages I'm trying to use.
sure. So yeah, all different forms of storytelling, I guess. So what advice would you give to other business leaders in how to kind of factor in storytelling to inspire their brand or kind of talk more about what they're doing? Sounds like that's kind of a factor in a lot of you know the company and what you're doing with Talk.
Yeah, I would say authenticity is so important. When we first started Toak and we had, the idea was to make this ultra luxury, and the first kind of drafts of the booklet that we were writing and all the way that we were speaking about our company. I was the content writer for many years, certainly then. And at first I thought that I should adopt this luxury tone. I'd look at what some of the other luxury, the really, the luxury companies like Hermes or, Cartier, what have you.
Mm,
I would look at the way that they communicated and I said, okay, let's try to communicate that in that same way. And I remember really early on, my co-founder Carl Schweitzer kind of said to me, "Hey, listen, Jerry, this doesn't sound like us. This isn't authentic. It sounds like we're trying to be something that we're not." And so we just and he was right, and I knew it. And we went back to the drawing board and kind of rewrote everything and started speaking. And that still came from a brand voice. It wasn't me as an individual speaking, or him as an individual or Denise, but it was the three of us together in the form of a brand speaking pretty close to our hearts and trying to be as honest and authentic at every single turn. And so I think that's good general advice. And I think that applies to any content people are doing. People can smell lack of authenticity from a long way away. And I think also there was a phase where right when we came out and when we launched the product, there were people in the industry who just, who are these new guys? Like, I hear he's this one of them is from Wall Street. Sounds like a bunch of, Wall Street guys launching this chocolate company. And that just wasn't the case. And so what we had to really just kind of transparently tell our story as much as possible, give information. This is what we're doing. This is what we're trying to do. This is where we've come from. This is how we're doing it. You have to be you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to be open. You have to be willing to accept that we don't always know. We're still trying to figure this out. We're not perfect. And I think people recognize that and gravitate towards that because that's just how life is.
true. Yep. So looking back at your journey, if you had to share one core piece of advice for entrepreneurs like yourself, does anything come to mind? Anything specific? Just general advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would say your life is going to be more fun and enjoyable if you choose to do something that you care about doing.
Hmm.
You may make a little bit less money if you do that, I must say, but you're probably going to enjoy the day to day more. You're going to stick with it more. And a lot of what I think success comes from is kind of consistency, persistence into if you're going to stay in the race for the long run, it should be something you really care about and you're driven to do. If it's not, probably you're more likely going to just kind of cut and run when the first obstacles arise, and obstacles will always arise. So I think that's a big one. And also when those obstacles do arise, try to take them in perspective and, rather than, get real frustrated or get, scared or down or start thinking the worst, just, I think, look at it as a challenge
Hmm.
and almost try to tell yourself it's a fun challenge. This is what life is about, and have fun trying to solve that challenge. Do your best you can, work with good people,
Hmm.
and usually things will work out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great takeaway. So if people wanted to learn more about you, your organization or your chocolate, what's the best way to reach out to you or find more information?
Yeah. So the Our website, TMA's website, is www.tma.earth. TMA stands for Third Millennium Alliance. So that's our nonprofit organization. If you want to learn about what we do in the rainforest, that would be the place. Toak Chocolate, you can find information on www.toakchocolate.com. So that's TOAK chocolate.com. I'm on the cusp of launching a Substack publication called Eco Prosperity that hasn't fully launched. It'll launch later in September. So that's a third way to do it.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And for our listeners, if you'd like to explore ways to grow and position your own business for success, I'd love to connect. You can search me up on LinkedIn. Just look for Ben Smith, WSI, or go to our website at smithgroup.wsiworld.com. So, Jerry, thanks a lot for joining us today. It's been an awesome conversation.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Be sure to explore Jerry's work. We'll put his website addresses and his LinkedIn profile in the show notes so you can learn more about him and maybe order some of the chocolate from Toak. Thanks everyone for listening. Be sure to follow The Net Result on Spotify and YouTube. Until next time, keep striving for growth.